Carlson is with us again this morning to talk about our wonderful Effie Smith exhibition. And I know some of you haven't had much time to study it yet because you were out of town and having fun this summer. But we will also have another, maybe at 11 o'clock, a second presentation because we think we have more people coming up. And then Stephen this afternoon plans to do a walkthrough in the gallery. Are you thinking around 1?
At 1:30.
At 1:30. So that would be really beneficial. He is the guru of Effie Smith and knows details and things that I do not because you've studied her for more than 10 years and he's related, but I'll let him tell that story. So I'm just going to give a little introduction about how Stephen and I came together and say a few words about where we're going, the direction of the museum with women's art. But Stephen and I were talking years ago already, it feels like maybe 5-6 years ago, at least, about having an exhibition on Effie Smith. And I was always going from one show to the other, and with no breaks in the calendar that I could say, oh, right here, this will work. So when I came up and you discovered me through, I forget how, Mark Sublett maybe?
Yes, you were on a podcast with Mark Sublett with his Medicine Man Gallery.
Yes, Mark Sublett's Medicine Man Gallery in Tucson. You know how he interviews people, so that Mark was interviewing me, and that's how Stephen learned of my interest in women's art and what we were doing, what I was doing with women's art before I ever even knew about the position up here. So it all just timed out really well, that when I came here, I really have an open exhibition schedule for the most part to start with. So we got right on it, and we figured out, okay, this will coincide beautifully and this started right after I got here too, collecting early Western women's art through the generosity of Dita and John Dobb. So we managed to put on the calendar a show of the Dobbs collection as we've been purchasing it, which you'll see, or maybe you already have, up in the gallery. And it worked beautifully with Effie, because Effie, as you know, is a very early Western woman artist. And so we could have like a close examination of one artist and then a bigger show of many artists right next to it. So that was neat. Well, we had it this week. I don't want to surprise any of you if you haven't seen it. When you walk in the gallery, we added this Smithsonian traveling exhibit called Why We Serve Native Americans in the Armed Forces. And that is a banner exhibit. It's all on banners that we located in between the Fisher Gallery, where the Dobbs collection is, and then the Effie Smith. So we kind of put those banners throughout both galleries. I know some of them need a little better lighting, so we'll work on that this next week with Noah. But we had to move those out of here because the contract is you can't have food with those banners up, and we have to have them on display all the time, rightfully so. So what we did, we moved them over there, and because we're going to have on the 24th, Friday, October 24th, John Coleman's exhibition opening in this gallery, and there will be hors d'oeuvres served here, and some cocktails, beverages. And that same day about noon, we're going to also install the 10-foot tall John Coleman bronze. It's incredible. It's titled Victory Plenty Coup, and it's the Native American Plenty Coup. You can read about him, his history on the web, on the internet. And he's on this magnificent horse that's rearing up. It's about a 1,000-pound sculpture, almost 10 feet tall, including the Plenty Coup stick. So that'll all be October 24th, so please mark that on your calendar. And I hope Stephen can make it up for that too. That would be a lot of fun. So we've got a lot of great things going on. And I'm just going to go right now into my PowerPoint that I have. Just a quick one to kind of refresh what we've been doing with the Western Women's Art Collection and the Dobbs. And then Stephen's going to give a fantastic PowerPoint on Effie Smith. And then I think we'll open it up to questions as opposed to me presenting and then questions. So we'll do the questions at the end. So any questions? All right, here we go. So the desert, oops, I have to get my microphone right here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Also, we have Adina and John got an incredible gift, as you all know, last year. And so we've been purchasing great art by the dogs, from from many, many places. And this is our Georgia O'Keeffe. And this O'Keeffe, I might just use this one, Stephen. I think I'll just use this one. Seems a little better for me right now. So this is a Georgia O'Keeffe, beautiful painting. You'll see it in the exhibit entitled Tree, 1917, a very early painting of hers. But really, with our dog collection, we're talking about how we are going to really set the stage for this museum to reclaim marginalized artists, which includes, of course, women artists and Native American artists, and many, many other artists. And often I've heard throughout the years in different museums where I've worked, where's the representation of women artists? So this is one of our challenges, you could say, is to really, we're already building upon a fine collection of our Cowgirl Up art, but with the dog's gift, we're now bridging the past with the present. And this is a wonderful painting by Barbara Latham, who, you'll see this in the exhibit, it's hanging up right now. And some of the works that you'll see are from New Mexico, Arizona. We're also at a stage where we're building a lot more Arizona women artists right now. So I guess you could say one of the main issues is just finding the work by them, especially the early ones, that really would be good for a museum collection. So it's a lot of kind of ferreting out, and scouting and looking for pieces and having collectors approach me and dealers, and always keeping my eyes out on auctions and things like that. So we're identifying artists. We've come across a few that I've never heard before, which is always fun, to discover an artist that you knew nothing about, and then to secure those. As I said, we have to go through an acquisitions collections process, and then it goes to the full board for final approval. So we just can't go out and buy anything we want. There is a process. We really have kind of done that. It's been an amazing experience, but there is a process, thankfully, in place where the committees approve everything, and then we go forward and we get it to the museum. So what we really want to address also what people want to see and learn more about, and a great way to do that is learning about the women artists and start building a collection with the Cowgirl Up art that we have every year. And I think probably everyone here knows that we do have an art acquisition fund. So when we have our annual Cowgirl Up show and sale that kicks off at the end of March, we have our judges go through in the selection committee, and they pick out one, sometimes two, where's the train? Sometimes two works of art that we buy for the collection. So this is a great Marjorie Reed stagecoach painting, also up at the gallery. So far, it's been very transformative for our museum, this collection building and exhibitions associated program, like today's program, and just, building more on it, having more and more outreach. We will be adding another member to our team next week. Next Tuesday, Nathan Wentz begins, and he will be the new education manager. His hours will be 32 hours a week, so he's right now Tuesday through Friday, but as needed on weekends and evenings, of course, then he can work that into his schedule and switch things around. But just so you all have an idea, and he begins next Tuesday, so I'll be giving him some tours and things Tuesday and Wednesday, and Jessica will be coming along. And thank you, Jessica. Jessica's filming this today too, so it'll be available. I think we're going to put it on YouTube. Look at Caesar. Hey, Caesar.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, super. So we can watch it again and send it out to other folks too. This is a complete of Velarde painting, and we're adding Native American artists to the collection. Very important Native artist, Pueblo. And also these pots that you see here are on exhibit. Margaret Tafoya, actually it's just one pot with a side view. It's a monumental piece. The size, the scale of it, an avenue or the water pattern going around it. So that was generously purchased also through the acquisition fund of Dita and John Dobb. And then the wonderful thing about bridging all of these wonderful artist works from early to contemporary and building our collections and our exhibition and educational programs, we'll of course be doing more exhibitions. We'll have a new building to also have fun in, and doing traveling shows. And the show that Stephen and I put together today is, an idea, as I mentioned, of having one single artist exhibited during the Dobbs. And this is going to help us also in terms of making connections to other institutions, organizations, which we've done through Stephen and other museums in the southeast part of the state. They've loaned generously to the Effie Smith exhibition, and Stephen's Effie Museum has also contributed archives and information, and which you'll see in a moment, some of that great work that he's been doing. And Effie's life dates are 1869 to 1955, and oftentimes I forget, she was born so long ago. She seems like it just doesn't seem, her work is still very relevant to today. And the Western Art and Architecture magazine, the October-November issue, did a beautiful, you can read it online as well, article about Effie, and has some beautiful quotes in there of her and how she perceived also looking at the desert and making those connections to the incredible state that we live in. So without further ado, that's my talk this morning, just to kind of get us charged up for what you're going to see or you already have seen. And then Stephen Carlson from the Effie Smith Museum is very kind to be traveling back and forth from Bakersfield, California, and helping make this possible. So Stephen, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tricia. There are a few things over here on the table which you're welcome to take. There's a sample copy of a book that we have that's shown on our website. And there's also a monthly, what we call an Effiegram. That's a Substack posting that I do. And you're welcome to sign up for that. You can do that online, or you can just do it over here on the table, and I'll be happy to get you added into that. So let's see if I remember how to run my computer here. Yeah. So we are actually not a bricks and mortar museum at this point. We are a virtual museum. Our collection is not huge, but you will see over there at the main galleries, we have 55 of Effie's paintings. 20 of them are our permanent collection, which I have been gathering over the last 15 years. They don't come up very often in auction or for sale, but every once in a while something pops up on eBay or someplace like that. That seems to still be the relevant market. But this was me in 2019, 6 years ago, in Tucson, at the Tucson Desert Art Museum, where we did a smaller exhibit, but it was the first time we were able to gather a significant number of Effie's paintings, and then a lot of the family photos. I'm a great-grandnephew of the artist. We were able to post on the back wall, and these are some of the paintings you will see in the exhibition here at Desert Caballeros Western Museum. This is a Tucson view, but a lot of her paintings are from southeast Arizona. This is definitely northern Arizona. She spent a fair amount of time up there in the late teens and early 1920s painting scenes. This is near her home in Pierce, which is in the middle of Cochise County. Other scenes of other mountains there. The Chiricahuas and the Dragoon Mountains go north and south, and they kind of border the Sulphur Springs Valley, which used to be called the Apache Valley, because that was the Chiricahua Apaches' land down there. And these are photos of Effie from different points of her life, about 1890 on the left. This is 1895, right after she married in Bisbee. And then this is for a newspaper article in 1929, and the other photo that was back there was from her time in Douglas around the time of her 80th birthday. This is a magazine article from 1929 about her. It's right after her house had burned down. She was age 60 in the time that this was done, and it was 12 days before her 60th birthday that the house burned down. September 17th, 1929. Of course, you know what was happening in the late September, October, the stock market crash. It was not a great time in a lot of ways, but she went right back to work painting because she had shows coming up in Washington, Philadelphia, and New York. And if you just lost 50-some paintings that you were going to take east, you have to get busy, especially if you want some large ones. So she was able to pull it off. This is a much earlier photo of her from about, I would guess, about 1905 there in Pierce. I'm just going to back for a minute because you can see that sloping hill in the background. That was the hill that was the Commonwealth mine, still there. And that was the source of her husband and her wealth for a period of time. You don't see any of these trees or the garden there now because that was all supported by the water that were constantly pumping out of the mine shafts to keep them from flooding. But she was quite a gardener. She grew up in Arkansas, born in Nashville, Arkansas. 1869, it was just called Mining Creek, where she was actually born about a mile out of town. And she lived in Arkansas until she was about 25 years old, and then for a variety of circumstances that I'll refer to in a minute, she ended up coming west. This is the house she was born in. As you can imagine, it was built in 1848. It was not built by people who looked like most of us. It was built by enslaved people. It was a plantation house. In Arkansas, they put the big plantation houses in town because the women didn't like being stuck out in the country. And so that was her grandmother's house where she was born. These are her parents, who were fairly well educated for the time. Her father had gone to the University of Virginia. Her mother had gone to Washington Seminary for Girls, which was Washington, Arkansas, which was the county seat around there. She grew up there. And that seminary, they use the word seminary to make it sound more serious than just the kind of ornamental arts they would teach you, like embroidery and French and things like that. She had a real education. I don't know how many grade levels that went through, but they instilled in Effie some values and also public service. And both of her parents were very involved publicly in Arkansas, especially after the Civil War. And Effie grew up in 1869 and the 1870s and 80s, so that was the difficult years after the war. But that's when she started to draw and paint. These are a few of the things that, because of the model of her parents, that she became involved with in Arizona after she moved here. She founded a Red Cross chapter. She was involved in politics, nominally in the Republican Party, but later when a friend of hers ran for Congress, she was supporting her as a Democratic candidate. This is a book that's really changed my whole view of women in the South during the 19th century. A lot of paradigms that we come to accept kind of were exploded by this book, and I recommend it as something to read to get to understand people that came out of the world that Effie did coming west to reinvent herself. This was her education. All schools were private at this point. There were no public schools in Arkansas, so she went to Hope High School and Hope Female Institute. This is one of her very first paintings from 1884. It's hanging over here in one of the blue galleries. And it's, youthful. It probably looks more to the Hudson River School. You have to remember that, people like Claude Monet and Paul Cézanne were just establishing what Impressionism was around this time. And it was written about fairly derisively in U.S. newspapers until the 1890s. She had started to see a young man in Hope, Arkansas, where she was living after the railroad went through. That's where they moved. And his name was Willie. And she was going up to see him, and they got married in 1890, but very soon after their marriage, he died. tuberculosis 3 months after they got married. So it was a very difficult time for her. She ended up living with his family for a while. They ran a hotel in Arkadelphia, and it turned out that was kind of something she liked doing. It was a very social kind of thing to be living in a hotel. Later on, she did that a few other times in her life by choice. She became a teacher after going to the Hope Female Institute, and she, after going to the Southern Teachers Conference in Atlanta, went on a whole trip going up to the Northeast on the train with other women, and that's about the time that the first big exhibits in New York of Impressionism were being presented, and they were being received warmly. And of course, these are paintings by Monet, and I just want to go back here for a minute. This is Sunrise, and this painting by Monet was the one that the French Academy just could not accept. They said that this could not be a finished painting. So all that kind of blurriness to it. But of course, Monet went on to do a series of things, the poplars, the haystacks, different fields, paintings in the countryside, and of course the water lilies that he did more of than just about anything else. These are kind of the hallmarks of what Impressionism is. It emerged in the 1870s in France, and Monet is one of the leaders of it. And it really pivots off of the artist's emotional reaction to the subject and how it influences their color palette. There's French Impressionism, we hear about California Impressionism, there's also Impressionism in other parts of the US and around the world. I've been an advocate of the idea that Effie was part of the movement that brought Impressionism to Arizona, since she's about the earliest active resident woman artist that we know of in Arizona. Arizona Impressionism became a thing, possibly because of her. The whole series idea that gives you nuance, this is something that Monet and other French Impressionists were doing. You can see all the different impressions of the facade of Rouen Cathedral. He set himself up there in an apartment, and for some period of time, I think it was over a year, did all of these. They're quite large, so it's unlikely you will ever see an exhibit of all of them in one spot, but usually they'll try to gather a half a dozen or so. They've done that over in LA from time to time. The haystacks are what made Monet rich. I mean, he just did a lot of them and supplied a taste for these kinds of things. The poplar trees are another thing that he did, and they started cutting down those poplar trees, so he had to buy a whole bunch of them to preserve them so he could finish his paintings, and then they came back and cut them down and he sold the lumber. But Effie was doing a series of paintings as well here, and this is Cochi's stronghold in the Dragoon Mountains, which you can see from her house and get to very easily, and I've said that was probably her Rouen Cathedral, that it was natural, but she would go to different places around it. Paul Cézanne did this with Mount Saint-Victoire in France. He did 50 impressions of it over a number of years, and now it has preserved that because 3,000 homes are going in on that area. It'll never look the same again as it did. You know, the foreground going up to that mountain will be changed forever. These are the kinds of series that Monet was doing, and they influenced all the California Impressionists and Effie as well. Some of these are more popular, more famous than others, but there's that kind of idea of nuance that you get in repetition, and you will see that in the Effie exhibit in the 55 paintings we have there. It was criticized, the Impressionists were criticized for all of the painting they did outside. People thought that their eyes had been affected by it, and that's why everything proceeded from a blue or a purple color, that they were getting too much ultraviolet in their eyes. Monet actually had an eye surgery, I think it was about 1905 or 1910, and he was painting a little differently after that, so I don't know if that helped their argument. But there's a lot of violet and blue at the base colors, but that also helps you if you're trying to capture sunlight like in Arizona, because you've got yellow at the other polar opposite from those colors. I like this definition from Ayn Rand. Now, she came quite a number of years after Effie, but a lot of folks will criticize, or at least criticize during that period, Impressionists, because they thought that the colors were so unreal and they weren't photographic colors of what we see that happens, and that art is a selective recreation of reality according to the artist's metaphysical value judgments. It's the integrator and concretizer of man's metaphysical abstractions. It is the voice of his sense of life, his or her. And I think that's a pretty good definition of what is going on to a great degree with Impressionism. Around 1892, Effie was still living in Arkansas and teaching, but her brother was in the West, in Deming, New Mexico, Deming and Silver City, and he'd gone to work in mining and then at the railroads because he had TB. Probably wasn't good for him being in the mines. And he got working for the railroads and met this gal whose name was Smith, like Effie Anderson Smith, but not related. And they got married, and we think that the Andersons came out to for that wedding, and if so, that would have been Effie's first real view of yuccas like we see them in Arizona, although Arkansans will tell you they have yuccas too. And to begin with, I didn't believe it. I thought, oh, you must think pampas grass is like a yucca, but they do have some small ones, you know, there's so many different kinds. But the kinds that Effie was painting were definitely present over in Deming, New Mexico, but we haven't seen many of her New Mexico paintings yet. We know there are some. Around 1893, after they would have gone back, her father died. There was a devastating tornado through that area, and her mother was also very sick with TB, we believe. And there was the financial panic of 1893, which all the railroads in the United States went bankrupt on the same day. The economy was going to be a wreck for 5 years. They called that the Great Depression before the 1930s. So that and other things propelled them to come west, and Effie was able to stay with her brother, and she brought her mother and sister with her, and she was teaching in Deming, New Mexico, and she met this guy who was working with her brother at the railroad station, Andrew Young Smith, who was born in Scotland in 1869, and had come to the United States in the early 1880s and lived in Missouri for a while, trained as a stonemason there, and then came west and was living in the Suisun Valley of Northern California near San Francisco, and that's where he transitioned from stone cutting to the railroad work. Then quickly got a job in Deming, New Mexico, and that's where Effie and he met at the once-a-week club, where they would show up, young folks, 15, 20 years old, talking about all kinds of things, and came to Arizona. He asked her to join him in Arizona because he wanted to get into mining. He knew that railroading was kind of limiting if you were just going to be a station clerk. So they lived in Pierce. They first were in Benson for a year, which is a railroad town, and he had a railroad job there. Then they went to Pierce, and that was getting going. This picture of the mine and the mill there was probably in the early 1900s, about 10 years after they settled there in 1895. And he became bookkeeper there, a transferable skill from his railroad work. And there you see him with his horse. And this is the house they ended up having as their residence starting about 1897. And they built onto this quite a bit over the years. You can see the other side of it that has a porch there that later they screened in. We have other pictures of that. And she's on her horse there, her pet horse Maggie. They had their first child in 1896 in Pierce, but it wasn't a great place to give birth to a child. Both the child and Andrew Bosworth Smith and Effie were ill, and the closest place was Tombstone to get to over a very rough road over the mountains, and the baby died over there after 4 months. Effie recovered. They went back to Pierce, and she had her second son, Louis Anderson Smith, who I knew growing up as Uncle Louis, my great uncle actually, and he did very well there. That's the mine hill behind him with his little saw there, sawing wood for Christmas money, it says in the caption there. And these are over at some cousin's house where they have an orchard there. He went on to Stanford and University of Arizona and was involved with the Bureau of Mines in Washington, D.C., and then his father's Commonwealth mine in Pierce. A few other photos of him and them getting ready to go out of the country when he was younger. This was about 1918 when he graduated from the San Francisco Military Academy. He was supposed to go to France, and he had a unit of guys that he was going to take over there, but they almost all died from the flu pandemic of 1918. So never went. This was early on in their years in Pierce. This man came through. He was an investor in the mine, trying to help revive things there when there was a cave-in. But he was from Europe, Count Portalis, and he knew a lot about art. He actually was an investor in the Broadmoor Resort up in Colorado, and a lot of mining interest up there. And he's the one who kind of identified in the house that there were some paintings on the wall that he was curious about, and he asked Uncle Andrew, A.Y. Smith, whose paintings were those, and he said, well, that's Effie's, my wife. He called her F, just F. And he said, well, she should study with somebody who could help raise her technique more. And as they were starting to go to California more, because the train had come through in 1903 and they could take the train to LA pretty easily, that was more opportunity for her to connect with the California Impressionists. Later on, their son went to school in LA, and that was another opportunity where for 4 years in high school, she was around the Impressionists. They had a daughter in 1906 who did not live beyond 7 months, and that was a very, very difficult loss for her, and she said that was a great sorrow that propelled her to get back into her art seriously and full-time, because she, with family life and other things, it was kind of a part-time thing up until about 1908. And this is her early style, I would say. It's before she really studied a lot with the California Impressionists, and that is the mountain that is the hill, or Pierce Hill, they call it, where the mine is, and it's probably one of the moodiest paintings she ever did. There were certain artists that influenced her in California. Mae Bradford Shockley was up in Northern California, and she married a geologist that was at Stanford, and they became quite friendly. You see Mae here. This is in Tonopah, Nevada, when that place was exploding with mining. And these are some of their Mae's paintings. The ones in black and white are color, but these are from magazine illustrations. I don't think that the subject matter was very influential, Effie, but she learned a lot about color from Mae, and color palette and how to use that. This is the woman that probably had more of an influence on Effie than anyone else, Anna Hills, who was one of the founders of the Laguna Beach Art Colony. And Effie started studying with her in 1914, before even the Laguna Beach Art Association was founded. And they stayed in touch right up until Anna's death around 1930. These are some examples of Anna's work, and you can see there's kind of an impressionism influence here. Anna did study in Paris for a while, but she had the sea right there. So the cove in Laguna Beach, that's the part of that. But these golden trees end up showing up in Effie's paintings at some point. These are a couple of other Anna Hills paintings. If you're on Interstate 8, just before you get to Yuma, there is Montezuma's Needle, they call it. It's a rest stop right there. That painting sold not too long ago for about $30,000. This is where Effie studied. The Stickney sisters in Pasadena ended up turning their house into an art school and engaged various people from Europe. Jean Mannheim, or Jean Mannheim, but they called him Jean in the U.S., and Richard Emil Miller were both French-trained artists, and this was Mannheim's home and studio, very much like in Germany. You would have the name of the family on the house. He did that in Pasadena. That house is still there. This is my photo. I had to go find it. And Effie studied with him for 2 years, and he pretty much said to her, you've got the basics down here. You should really go back to Arizona and take everything you've learned here. You could paint eucalyptus trees and the ocean like we're all doing, or you could do something different. And I don't know whether it was the conversations between the two of them, but suddenly right after the time she was studying with him, suddenly he starts going out to the desert and painting. Of course, there were more people painting in the desert at that point, but eventually he came over and judged an art competition at the state fair in Phoenix, and his grandson told me, my grandfather didn't like to do stuff like that. Your aunt must have twisted his arm. And I also know there was a commission involved there to paint Governor Campbell's portrait, and he was a big portrait painter as well. This is another man that Effie came in contact with, oddly Dean Nichols. He was from Pittsburgh originally, ended up in El Paso, but he spent a lot of time in Arizona in the early 1900s painting mostly Arizona scenes and then taking them back and shipping them back to Pittsburgh and being sold there. And I think that his Rosy Sky influenced Effie because he provided a painting for the Gaston Hotel where Effie spent a lot of time in Douglas in the 1930s, and this painting from 1932 kind of shows the influence. And I know that they were in touch over the years because when Effie sold one of her Grand Canyon paintings, it went to El Paso and he was getting it framed for her, and there was a newspaper quote about him complimenting her on the Grand Canyon paintings. That's the one thing he didn't paint in Arizona was the Grand Canyon. I kind of divided Effie's art up into these periods, whether that's not, that might not be hard and fast, but there's the fully mature period and then there's a late period. And if you go to the galleries over there, you'll see the change in the color palette between about here and about here, especially from about 1943 on. And lately I found out that during the Second World War, because blue is one of the most expensive colors to get historically, that might just not have been as available. So her paintings are very earth tones until after the Second World War, and then it returns to the more kind of purple stuff. This was the Women's Club in Wilcox, which she wasn't a founding member of, but involved with very early on in the art committee. And from there she went on to be art chairman of the Southern District. The women's clubs were a huge influence for women, especially since a lot of women didn't have the opportunity to go to university or college. It wasn't just playing cards or something or socializing, it was real learning. They had speakers coming in all the time from the University of Arizona and other places, and all kinds of people that were coming to these women's clubs to speak, and she did the circuit of those, and that's where she did a lot of exhibits over the years and sold paintings. Let's go back for a second. This is her house in Pierce that was rebuilt after the one in 1929 burned down. It's still there today. This gate is still there. The two-room schoolhouse is gone. They now have another school building there. But this house is occupied by the mining company still. They're not very active there, but they have said they might move out of there if the mining starts going again and build their own project office. This looks like this was right after the house was built to replace the one that previously stood on the spot. There's Uncle Andrew. This is Effie. And the woman in the middle is a friend of theirs from Douglas, and it was her husband who ended up being the mayor of Douglas and was a physician who took these photos. This has to be right about 1930. That looks like their 1928 Buick in the background there. Effie has the big round school teacher glasses on. This is the sign you see when you go into Pierce today, and it's a little hard to read, but it says population 15. They had around 2,000 people at one time during the boom, and that is the Mine Hill there. And there is paved roads in there now. It didn't used to be years ago when I came to Desert Caballeros for the first time in the 80s. We talked about with my uncle going down there, and he said, "Oh, don't go, it's all dirt road. If it's rained, it'll be muddy." This is the way the house looked the first time I saw it about almost 20 years ago. It was in really bad shape, and I don't think anybody was living there at the time. And the mining company wasn't using it. As a matter of fact, I heard there were squatters in there at some point. This is a more modern Pierce school, and all the little towns around there, there's only 15 people. In Pierce's residence, there's a senior community near there, and a lot of the little towns still send their kids to school there. This is the way the house looks today, more or less. The mining company has spiffed it up. They put a new roof on it. They put a new floor in it. The bathroom works. It's a modern kitchen, but nevertheless, I'm glad that somebody's in there and that it's, they put a little sign over it for the Commonwealth Mine. And we've had board meetings in there of our Effie Anderson Smith Museum. This is the way the house looked in the 1940s when those trees had gotten quite big. And of course, once Effie was gone and stopped watering them, they all died, and there's none of them left there. But after that house burned in 1929, and I told you she got real busy about painting, and to try to do this exhibit between May and June of 1931, she was at George Washington University, Corcoran Hall there. It is said she was at Corcoran Gallery, I'm not so sure. In Philadelphia, New York, I think that the Philadelphia show was with a women's club there, and in New York, Phelps Dodge, that was their headquarters. So I think there were just connections that she had there to do those. This is one of her Grand Canyon paintings, which was gifted to us about 15 years ago when I deferred to the first exhibit of our modern era of exhibits of her paintings at Douglas. It was owned by the same family for quite a number of years that took it from her when she was going into the Pioneers home. Someone in the family didn't like the patination of the frame, which is like this one, and that metallic paint tends to oxidize after a while, turns greenish, and comes off in chunks. And so they painted the frame black and the other painting and done antiquing on it the way we used to do. And so I just decided, you know what, I have this really dark brown espresso accent wall at home. I'm going to have it gilded, and it really pops, but I don't recommend you do that. Some people would say you've destroyed the value of the frame. Sometimes the frames are as valuable as the paintings, but in that case, the paint job had been ruined. So I think these three paintings, you can say, are the three that were pulled out of the house fire. Nothing else survived that house fire, except for very few little things, silver items that we have over in display cabinets. But you'll see that these first two Grand Canyon paintings here are similar scenes, both right angel trail, but done at different times. One was 1928 and one was 1929. And the afterglow effect is just a little different on them. This is from looking east from the Alpine Point, and I have a feeling that the frame got burned. And that's why that newer frame is on there, but it's still probably from the period. Effie's painting still pop up. This was on eBay 3 weeks ago. And it's a painting from 1939. We don't know where the scene is because somebody had changed out the frame, so all the writing Effie would have had on the back. It was reframed in 2008, so somebody was still loving it because I can see the framer's label on it. But it showed up on eBay, and friends of ours, they're museum members, have acquired it along with another one. And I contacted the seller on eBay, and he said, "Oh, I found these at Goodwill in Portland, Oregon." So probably $5. Anyway, I will love to find out more at some point. This is Effie's husband. I'm not sure why I have this slide in here at this point, but you can kind of see his range of activity for two people who did not go very far in school. They did a lot of things. They were just kind of brilliant, self-learners. This is Effie at the gate of her house. Her husband died in 1931, October 31, not long after they got back from that Eastern tour. And so she lived in the house in Pierce for the whole 10 years of the Depression until the beginning of 1942, when she decided at the beginning of World War II and Pearl Harbor Day, she was not going to be in Pierce where the railroad tracks had been pulled up during the Depression. She wasn't going to be able to buy tires for the car during rationing during the Second World War, or get gasoline. I'm not even sure there was a gasoline station in Pierce anymore. So she decided to move to Douglas, which was a bigger town at that point. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But this is the way she would exhibit, because there weren't really that many proper galleries in Arizona at that point. There were a couple emerging in Tucson and in Phoenix. In El Paso, she could mostly display either in hotels where she'd set herself up or at photography shops. In the Gadsden Hotel, she'd been staying there on and off over the years because that's where they went to church and they were involved with the lodge. Going back to Arkansas and having lived with her first husband's family in a hotel that they ran, she set herself up in the Gadsden and lived in this third floor. Ground floor is 0 floor, 1, 2, third floor, northwest corner where she could look towards Bisbee and see the Mule Mountains. And she had this studio where people could come between 3 and 5 p.m. to visit her and look at her paintings, and that's where she was also teaching there as well. And she started during the war making smaller paintings, not only probably because of materials, but just because there were a lot of people coming through on the train. There was an air base there. There were a lot of people training. The women who were kind of stuck there with their husbands during the war were kind of wanting paintings that looked like the area around there. And there aren't really that many trees in Cochise County outside of the mountains. The yuccas are the trees, so she did a lot of yucca paintings during the 1940s. And I don't know whether it was the influence of, people like George O'Keeffe and the big flower paintings or whatever, where those were even around in the 40s. But she commented, talking about series, that she had not really thought about making the desert floor the subject of the painting. So many of her paintings, the subject is the landscape and the sculptural qualities of the mountains and things like that. So suddenly, in the 40s, we see all kinds of cactus, even greasewood or mesquite, becoming part of that. She had a circle of women students. We have a few of their paintings over here in the galleries here at Desert Caballeros as well as her own. And she had started this palette and brush club. That name is all over the country in women's arts groups especially. But those women went on to found the Douglas Art Association in the mid-50s, where I did the first exhibit in 2012. They had done other exhibits of her paintings there over the years, but this was the beginning of what has led to Tricia and I doing things now. This is Effie about 1950. We know exactly where this is. That checkerboard street, which you might not be able to see there easily, is the sidewalk in front of the Gaston Hotel. Not too many other places like that. And I believe that would have been Effie's sign of loyalty to Buick there behind her. That's a 1948 Buick Special. I've researched this a little bit. Effie's buried in Prescott, not in Pierce. She lived the last 4 years at the Pioneers Home because as an early Arizonan, she could live there for free. That was something the territorial legislature did as almost their last act, was to set up the Pioneers Home. And because she was involved with one of the founding businesses of Arizona, the territory, teaching, mining, all things like that. For some reason, Uncle Lewis, when she died, was a little off, and the tombstone says 1868, but it's really 1869. She was adamant about that. A lot of pieces of misinformation that went out through that death notice, but the main thing is that we're still talking about her. At age 80, she was talking about here that people could get a hobby and be active in painting or something like that, that any woman could start painting at any time. That you didn't have to have specific training, you just needed to start doing it and study with somebody that could show you and help you get started. She did a lot of exhibits over the years at these different locations. Many of them were at hotels, as I mentioned. The State Fair, she actually, in the same year, 1921, they started the Cochise County Fair, and she exhibited there. There wasn't really room for everything going on there, so some of the exhibits were at the Gaston Hotel where she lived for a while, but starting in 1922, she was in charge of the art department there and kept that going for quite some number of years into the 40s. And by the 1940s, around the time of her 80th birthday, she was being referred to as the Dean of Arizona Women Artists by papers like the Douglas Dispatch. This is the death notice from the Prescott Courier. It showed up a couple of other places. But by then she was pretty much forgotten, and she had a couple of paintings that were at the Louis Sterling Gallery in Phoenix, and Tricia found one of them in Fred Elliott's collection that went to the Scottsdale Museum of the West. But, so we think she was painting a little bit in Prescott, but probably was pretty much done at that point due to eyesight. In 1929, she had a visitor in her home, and Grace Dickinson Sperling, who was somebody that was from Chicago, I think had relatives in Pierce, and she'd asked Effie about her affection for the area, and Effie said yes, that she loved it so much that she would come back here as my paradise when I die. So there you go with the Desert Paradise exhibit name here, and that painting of the Dragoon Mountains at Cochise Stronghold is over here in our exhibit. This is a building in Douglas, which was the Phelps Dodge headquarters there when the smelters were running. We did our exhibit there in 2012, and they had done previous exhibits there at his 80th birthday, and in 1989 it was kind of a revival. The Douglas Historical Society House Museum has really interesting collections of all kinds, fabulous camera collection. And there are some of Effie's paintings hanging on permanent display there, and some of those are in the exhibit here. The Tucson Desert Art Museum, you wouldn't know that that's a converted restaurant or shopping mall, kind of a restaurant, but it it works pretty well as a museum. And we'll have to get started somewhere, right? And we did a 150th birthday retrospective there in 2019. We have photos of that online if you go to our website, effie.smith.org website. We thought we were going to go to Arkansas in 2020 and continue her 150th birthday celebration, but we all know what happened in 2020, the pandemic. So we had to delay that until 2023, but we went back to the 4 towns where she grew up, went to college, started drawing, got married, and did small exhibits in those towns. I took 25 paintings in my Honda CRV and drove around there for 4 weeks and had a great time and got to know the people about Arkansas, the people of Arkansas. And this is a little booklet that we have right now. There's pictures from the desert that is 17 images of Effie's paintings. We're kind of offering that through our website right now to donors. This is a book I've been working on forever, and I'm hoping to finish it in the next year or two, which is a book-length bio of Effie. And this is a book that's also in the works that's kind of keyed into our exhibit here. We hope that it will be done in the next couple of weeks here, and I'll have a sample copy to review and then hopefully get that out as well and make that available. And these are all the institutions and organizations and the people, including some important people here, that have helped over the years. I'm so grateful. I probably couldn't have done any of this without the supporters and the cooperation of all these organizations and families that have loaned paintings. So there you have it. That's my presentation on Effie Anderson Smith for today. I'm excited for you to see the paintings in the collection if you haven't seen them yet. Tricia, do we want to do a joint question and answer session here?
We sure can.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Stephen. That was absolutely brilliant. Just love it. So inspirational. Do any of you have questions for either one of us? Okay, I'll start.
Do you have a clue how many paintings you may have created?
I think up until the 1930s, when she was kind of there alone and working on the same painting for weeks and months, it was probably 100-ish. But as the 1930s went on and she had students coming to stay with her, and then she moved to Douglas, and there were just a tremendous interest there in her paintings, not only by local people. Douglas was a pretty big town at that point, and a lot of people going back and forth. There are hundreds. I know of at least 200 that I've seen in exhibition programs or reviewed in the newspaper, listings of paintings that were in an exhibit. And my guess is somewhere total between 500 and 1,000, but a lot of them are smaller. The younger paintings or the cactus paintings, she was doing a lot of those in the 40s, pretty much knocking those out, but still spending, the required time to make them look good. Yeah. Yes?
I was just wondering, was she able to make a living of selling her paintings?
She supported.
So many times,
Yes, she supported herself from the 30s. It was kind of hard selling paintings in the 1930s of any size. But in the 40s, she seemed to be doing pretty well with that, because we know that the will from her husband in 1931, now think about 1931 dollars. If somebody said that you had $11,000, that's probably like $111,000 now. But still, she lived a long time after her husband. And then she was living in a hotel and having to pay for that. So it seems up to a certain point in the 40s that she was funding herself, but then I would say by about 1946 she was spending more time living with her son part of the year in Morenci, and so I think it was more of a part-time income. But, to say that she was totally funded by her paintings, like a lot of artists, it doesn't always happen that way. Yeah.
So you're a descendant?
I am a great-grandnephew, so I'll, for the genealogist in here, I'll explain this. My grandmother grandmother's sister married Uncle Lewis. So Effie's had one of 3 children who lived to adulthood. That was Lewis Anderson Smith. He was married twice. His second wife was my grandmother's sister. So I'm not related by blood. There are a lot of people around who are related by blood, who are nieces and nephews, great nieces and great nephews. I'm the painting magnet in the family. And stuff just started coming to me. We had 2 paintings from her that came down to Uncle Lewis, and then through my mother and sister to me eventually. I wasn't even interested in art. I don't know how I got involved with this. Boxes of things started showing up on my doorstep in San Diego when I was living there. Boxes full of clippings. The tea set that you'll see over here. And then eventually when I went back to where I grew up in upstate New York, where a lot of things had gone from Arizona because they closed down their houses here. Then those paintings came to me, and so I am what we call in my family a shirt-tail relation, but there's a lot of second marriages and all that kind of thing, and we just consider anybody family who's even related by legal. Yes?
Did she ever call herself an impressionist painter?
Interesting comment. I don't think so. We refer to her that way because it's the closest niche that we can find for her, as well as being a desert painter. Desert painting is a thing. There's a whole subset of impressionists or not impressionists, but people who are desert painters, and that's their focus. No cowboys, no Indians, no cattle, no horses, no sign of human life. Just the raw natural beauty of the desert, as the pioneers would have seen it when they got here, as the native peoples revered it for millennia before that. But she was referred to as, I think the term that was being used at that point was a colorist, because you will see in certain of her paintings, if it's not the sky, then there's a really intense color band through it. And remember, the paints that she had are not acrylics like we have today, where the colors all really pop with these acrylics, and artists like to use them because they dry fast. These oil paintings, I mean, if you want to get technical about it, how long does it take an oil painting to dry? 20 years. So if you take a painting that's 10 years old or 15 years old and something has happened to it and you want to get it cleaned, the conservator is going to be really careful with it. And what has happened a couple times with her paintings is that, I don't know if she went back later and signed things, she wasn't really good to begin with about signing things, then the signature will lift right off when they go to start cleaning it. So they have to do a lot of solubility testing all around it. And then they usually will use black light on it to see if anything has been, with water colors already filled in. You got to take the varnish off of it. It's a lot of work to do that. But we get back to your question, Impressionism, I think that's the closest we can put her as far as being a style of painting. And when you think of all the people she studied with, they were all Impressionists, California Impressionists, and people who studied with French Impressionists. So it seems logical that that's the connection. Yes?
And you mentioned, what year was it that the first Impressionist paintings came over from Europe that she would have seen?
They were coming over before 1890, but the exhibits in 1891 and 92 in New York, I believe, were the ones that were being really embraced by people, rather than people thinking that, this is comical. You can even see in the Arkansas newspapers in the 1880s, even in little Arkansas, Arkadelphia, Arkansas, the Southern Standard has got articles about Impressionism, and they just think it's a joke. They don't think it's serious. These can't be finished paintings. And but by the 1890s, it was suddenly in fashion, probably in the Upper East Side homes. Yes.
Through your presentation, there were a lot of snippets of information that, as it goes, right now I'm trying to remember what I want to use in my tour.
Sure.
Do you have a script of this, or is this just coming out?
I just did that extemporaneously today.
That's what
Now I've done a script. I have another talk that when I did this for the Arizona Historical Society, I wrote a script, and because we were doing that during the pandemic and it was online, since I've come out of broadcast, which was my career, I didn't like I was doing broadcast.
I thought that's the answer
Yeah.
I was going to give, but not the one I wanted.
Okay, well, there is a docent edition
Yeah,
of
it's
Pictures to the Desert.
in that docent edition, but not all of those.
Well, you have the website also. There's a lot of this is on the website. And if you have any, like, really things that are bothering you that you're thinking, like, I really wonder what he said about this, just send me an email or call me and I can fill you in. Okay?
This card is up here.
Okay.
Yeah, those cards say EA Smith Archive. That was the pre-incorporation, nonprofit incorporation name, but that was given to you. Yes.
So, you were talking about doing a presentation on these.
Yes.
When I just talked with you before we hit on this briefly, that some of the paints that they were used during that point in time, when you're doing restoration, you have to make combinations of paint to try to match that.
I think that today they try to use modern paints that are not acrylic, just the modern version of what these paints are. But the problem that we've had with some of her paintings, when you mix paint, because she did it for powder, putting oil in it, mixing it with one of these grinding stones, you don't know if you got a good or bad batch of paint for 40 years. So if some of these paintings start to crinkle in the sky and crack, and then over time, depending on what conditions it's being kept in, you can tell I went through this a little bit with some of these paintings. Where the cracks are, it starts to lift off the canvas and cup. Then you're going to lose paint off of that. And some of the paintings have been gifted to us in really horrible situations, not only with as much as 20% of the paint missing, and it's usually the sky because of a lot of lead, the brighter colors, the blue is a lot of lead in that, but then with punctures and all kinds of things. The great news is that everything can be fixed, but if you're buying fine art and you paid a lot of money for it, and then it gets punctured, it's never going to be a non-damaged painting again. But you can match those colors because I can point out to you when we go to the gallery, the paintings that have had the most restoration work on them. There's 2 or 3 in there that either had a lot of paint missing from them, or somebody took it off the wall and leaned it up against a chair because they were doing something else, and then the next thing you know, the arm of the chair goes right through the painting. This really nice T hole in there, and that has to be fixed. And the conservators are amazing. They can do it, it's just there's not enough of them left, and a lot of them are not teaching anybody. That's a problem. Even here in Phoenix, it's hard to find people to do the work on these things. So it takes lots of time. Yes?
Do you know if any of the women artists that she studied under, are they being collected just as you're doing this amazing job?
Oh yes, both Mae Bradford Shockley and especially Anna Hill's, their paintings are much sought after, very, very much so. But they're kind of the bigger names, well, especially Anna Hill's being a Laguna Beach art colony founder, and she did not live an extremely long life, and so, just the limited number of paintings of hers that are out there do fetch quite a price, but there's always a lot of focus on some of those art colony areas, names like that. Trying to think of the other women she studied with. Unfortunately, not all of them are getting their due, and that's one of the most important things about what Desert Caballeros Western Museum is doing, is highlighting these sometimes forgotten or obscure women's artists from the earlier periods, and of course, all the wonderful artists of today with Cowgirl Up, and trying to level the playing field. I don't know if that's what you would say, but just give them a fair opportunity to be seen. And Effie Smith, we're just delighted that this could happen because it's a dream come true to be here and to do this and have this many of her paintings in one spot. Never happened before. This is it, yeah. Any other questions? Tricia?
Well, I think that was just wonderful.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Steve.
you.